Okay, this particular problem in my open math uses this the same asset. You're still buying a copier. You have a different cost and a different salvage or residual value, but it's still a 5-year life, and the copier is still going to produce 100,000 copies over its useful life. And you can see here, this particular problem has us using the units of production method to calculate depreciation. It's still asking us to come up with the same exact answers, the first 2 years of depreciation under the units of production method, the accumulated depreciation at the end of year 2, and the book value at the end of year 2. So let me pull up my example here. And I'm going to use the same exact machine that we purchased when I went over the straight line method. And it's a $900,000 machine that we purchased on January 2nd. The machine has a salvage value or residual value of $100,000, an estimated 10-year life, and the machine is expected to produce 500,000 units over its useful life. And again, this particular problem is asking us to prepare the journal entry to record depreciation. And again, it doesn't matter which method of depreciation you are using, your journal entry to record depreciation is always going to be a debit to depreciation expense and a credit to, misspell, and a credit to depreciation, accumulated depreciation. I cannot spell today. And so then the different methods, whether it be straight line method, the units of production method, or the double declining balance method, is just a factor of figuring out the amount that you're going to use to depreciate. It says prepare the journal entry using the units of production method of depreciation, assuming 30,000 units were produced in 2016. And so the units of production method, the formula is, the numerator is the same. It's still cost minus salvage value or residual value. That's still your numerator. But the denominator now, instead of dividing by the 10 years for the useful life, we're going to divide by the number of units that are estimated to be able to be produced by this machine. That's why it's called the units of production method, because we're using units now instead of lives. So number of units expected over useful life. So that is the formula for the units of production method. So then we just have to pick up the numbers and plug them in. Our cost is still $900,000. The salvage value is still $100,000. So that's going to be our numerator. But now, instead of dividing by 10 years like we did with the straight line method, now we're going to divide by the total number of units that are expected to be produced over the life of this asset. So 500,000 units is what they're expecting to be able to produce with this asset. Oops. Sorry guys, my math is not coming up great here. Let me just key that in real quick. So when we pull the calculator up to do that math, $900,000 minus the salvage value gives us $800,000 to depreciate over the life. Oh, I'm sorry, not over the life, over the number of units. So then divide that by 500,000 units, and you get $1.60. So we have $1.60 worth of depreciation per unit. And so with the units of production method, you're going to have 2 steps. Notice here I've got step 1, step 2. So step 1 is this. It's using this formula to calculate your depreciation per unit. Then step 2, so we'll key in here $1.60 per unit. And then step 2 is now taking that $1.60 per unit and multiply it times how many units you actually produced that year. So you can see the units of production method is a little bit more accurate than the straight line method, because we're actually taking this amount and we're multiplying it times the number of units that were actually produced. And so for this particular example, it tells us that where the units produced during 2016 was actually 30,000 units. So now we can take that $1.60 and multiply it times the number of units we actually produced, 30,000. So $48,000 is going to be the amount of our journal entry. That's the amount of depreciation we're going to be able to take for this particular asset using the units of production method. So that was $1.60 per unit times the 30,000 units. And that's for 2016. So for the remaining 10 years, they'll have to tell you how many units you produced each year in order for you to be able to calculate the depreciation for that year. And so then requirement 2 says calculate the depreciation unit using the units of production method for 2017, assuming 60,000 units were produced. Okay, so we don't have to go through this step 1 again. The step 1, that $1.60 per unit will hold true for all 10 years. Okay, so step 1, we don't have to do again. We can just plug in the $1.60 per unit. But step 2, we have to now take that $1.60 per unit and multiply it times the number of units we actually produced in 2017, which is 60,000 units. So if I pull up my calculator, 60,000 units times 1.6 is going to give me $96,000 of depreciation for 2017 using the units of production method. So then requirement 3 says, what is your accumulated depreciation at the end of 2017? And remember that accumulated depreciation is the amount of depreciation taken on this asset since you put it in service. So in 2016, we did $48,000 of depreciation because we only produced 30,000 units that year. In 2017, we did $96,000 of depreciation because we produced more units that year. And so my total accumulated depreciation for both years is $144,000. So you can key that right into the blank in My Open Math once you have that figured out. And then the last part is, again, figuring out your book value. Remember, your book value is your cost minus your accumulated depreciation. My cost of this asset is $900,000. That's what it cost me to buy it. My accumulated depreciation I just figured out was $144,000. And so when I subtract the two, I come up with a book value of $756,000. Again, make sure you're reading the problem, and this is asking for the accumulated depreciation at the end of 2017. And so your book value at the end of 2017 is $756,000 because that would be 2 years worth of depreciation. Your book value represents what you estimate you have left to use up of this asset.